Hello, this is Ceaseless Sunk here from Hotkeyit.com, and I've got a video that is all about Blink Micro and all the different situations that you can use Blink Micro to your advantage in order to end up giving yourself some sort of advantage here in gameplay. In Protoss vs. Protoss, if you have even a very, very large probe disadvantage, like in the example here, I'm facing an opponent down by over 10 probes. If you have Blink, and your opponent does not, and I know my opponent does not because I was just in an engagement down here, you can use your Blink ability if you know where their army is, and there's the opportunity, and snipe a whole lot of your enemy's probes, or even take out tech. Even though I only have 4 stalkers here, you'll see me claw my way back into this game very quickly using Blink. So here I identify where my opponent's army is, start running myself across the map. I already have an observer in place. Be sure to have a proxy pylon to warp in additional stalkers in if you need them. And before you warp up the ramp, you have to make sure that there's not an army there. In this situation, I know his army's here, so I'm good. Blink in. He started at 28 probes. And now we're even on probes. And I almost take out a free stalker. And I get a observer here. And now here, this moment is pretty important. If your stalkers are caught behind force fields while your blink is still on its cooldown, then your stalkers can't retreat properly. So you have to be able to time your blinks in such a way as that you'll have enough time to walk around without getting caught behind force fields during your cooldown. So as you can see here, once I see the force fields are being laid down, I immediately start running away. And go ahead and retreat. If you're not sure of where your opponent's army is, which I'm in that state right now, I'm not sure where it is, and you have blink stalkers at the edge of your opponent's base, go ahead and just blink up one stalker into their base and check out what's going on. And you can oftentimes get your one stalker to retreat. However, if you blink up your whole army of stalkers and they all happen to be trapped, you'll end up losing all of them and your resources lost will skyrocket. You'll just lose all your stalkers. So it's better to test and lose one stalker than to lose all of them. Blink stalkers are also really, really fast. And the point I want to make here is that you can use their speed in order to gain an advantage if you play accordingly. As in, if you use your blink stalker speed to benefit you. So here's a slow army with a Colossus. And this is during a PvP game, and it's going to take out this Nexus. And then if the blinking player just engages the Colossus army as it comes up this ramp directly, he'll likely lose and then end up losing his base and lose the game. But the red player does something instead. Here the Nexus falls, pokes out momentarily and blinks back up. Does not want to just directly engage the army. Now he uses his observer to make sure he knows where the army is, and once he knows where it is, he can make an informed decision to go where the majority of the army is not. And here he gets 3 stalker kills, a probe, and a free pylon. And now suddenly, using smart positioning, this red blink stalker player is now in a far better place than the player than the Colossus is, and is actually heading towards the opponent's base. And the reason this works is because now this small army won't be able to reinforce itself without a pylon. And it's also very slow. So if he were to attack up the ramp into this red base, the red player would have an advantage in a base trade because his units are so much more mobile. He can jump around the map extremely quick. So by going where the opponent's main army isn't, you can deal a lot of damage. And you can do that when you have a very fast army. Almost kills the Colossus. Ends up killing the Colossus using mobility, and then retreats. And now it's an even game, when before it was a very uneven game. Here's an example of some strong blink micro in a PvZ situation. You'll see initially, as the Protoss army engages this Zerg army out here, he starts blinking back some of the injured stalkers, and then actually blinks forward aggressively to chase off and get a few more shots. So here you can see the Protoss doesn't realize that the Zerg army here is here at the moment. But then during the engagement, immediately starts to blink back weakened stalkers. So you can see these ones were under fire, they were blinked back. This weak one is blinked back. This next one is probably about to go. And now that the Protoss can see the small Zerg army is retreating, he can grab all of his stalkers and do an aggressive blink forward and get a few more shots off that he wouldn't be able to otherwise. Blinking stalkers back during battles that are injured to help them stay alive a little bit longer so they can shoot some more shots. Helps preserve the overall DPS of your army. And you can end up killing enough enemy units so that you can overcome your opponent during a battle and win. To whereas you might have lost without the micro. So here's an example of a bunch of things against some stalkers. There will be no micro from the Protoss player. Here's that same battle featuring Blink Micro against the Zergling Ball.
Our allies' base is under attack. Our allies' base is under attack.
Blink can also be great for mitigating the amount of damage that Banelings will give or deal to a Stalker Ball, or any army with Stalkers in it actually. While there's a bunch of Banelings rolling towards your Stalkers, if you just let this happen, you can see that the Banelings will do quite a bit of damage to your Stalkers. However, if you utilize some clean Blink Micro, you can end up losing very, very little. By spacing your stalkers apart, you end up having very little splash damage dealt to multiple stalkers from one Baneling. In the mid and late game in PvT, it's oftentimes beneficial for the Protoss player, especially when they have an observer over the Terran army. So take their Blink Stalkers and take advantage of whenever there's a stray unit, perhaps a Marauder. What the Protoss player does is they run up, snipe the Marauder, and run away before they take any damage. Same goes for medevacs as well. Medevacs are generally slower than a Terran army, especially if the Terran army had stimmed. So if there's a Terran army with a medevac straggling behind, oftentimes a Protoss will blink in and snipe one, or they'll snipe one and then blink away during the retreat. So picking off stray units with a pack of Blink Stalkers, and then blinking away before any damage is dealt, is a very great way to sort of gain very small advantages for free. I messed that one up, let me go one more. You have your straggling Terran unit. You come in, you take a shot, and then blink away. And of course these stalkers will continue running away. Oftentimes in PvZ, blinking Blake stalkers at infestors offensively is actually a really good idea, because it's pretty easy to trade efficiently if you can get your stalkers near the infestors. Knowing that an infestor costs 100 minerals and 150 gas, a stalker is 125 and 50, which is a lot cheaper, especially in terms of Vespene. So you can see here, in this situation, the Protoss player opts for blinking over a bunch of infested Terrans, which actually does two things. The infested Terrans are going to be likely to target fire these Immortals, and not deal a whole lot of damage, while the Colossus does splash damage on these small units, killing them pretty quickly. And it would be pretty pointless to have your stalkers firing at these infested Terrans when they could be firing at infestors themselves. So during this infested blink, or this offensive blink, 1, 2, 3, 4, And you can see there that me being the Protoss player focused down infestors with priority of ones with energies. So I've killed 4 infestors so far, and 5. And I think 3 out of the 5, or maybe even more, had enough energy to throw off a fungal. So not only did I kill infestors and make these stalkers pay for themselves, but I also prevented fungals, which is extremely important as well. And I ended up losing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 infestors for 5 stalkers is a very good trade for the Protoss. Another offensive blink onto the infestors, a very, very good idea in this situation so that they can't just run away and gather more energy. 1, 2, 2 infestors for 2 stalkers right there. And now they're just not going to be able to get away, and I'll be able to get all of them, which is a ton of resources. Here we have what is commonly referred to as the death blink. It's when, usually done in PvZ, but it can be done in any matchup. It's when you have a bunch of blink stalkers that are winning a battle, and it lets you finish the battle off really quickly, dealing maximum DPS while minimizing the amount of stalkers you'll lose. So in this battle, these front few stalkers that are injured are the ones that are likely going to die if the Zerg turns around and attacks me. However, if I take all the stalkers and blink all the way around these few roaches, the stalkers that are going to be engaged by the roaches are ones in the middle of the pack with full HP, whereas the ones that are injured are likely to be around the edges where the remaining forces won't actually be firing. Also, once you blink on top and surround the opponent's remaining forces, all of your units are in range immediately and they can all fire all at once, which lets your army do maximum DPS. So here we have an in-replay example. A small Zerg force. And you'll see the front few stalkers are getting injured here. And I'm blinking them back, and then right as the Zerg, I see the Zerg start to retreat, or right when I feel they might retreat, I do a death blink. So now the injured stalkers are off to the outside, while ones with full HP are in the inside. And all of these are in range are going to immediately fire and deal damage to all the roaches. And the roaches end up dying before they can kill any stalkers. During an engagement in PvZ, if at any time the opponent overmakes corruptors, like in this example here, my opponent made too many corruptors to kill my Colossus, and you have a lot of stalkers left over, chase those things down and kill them. And if you do that, like in the replay example that I'm going to show you now, you'll be able to secure yourself a victory because those corruptors are very expensive. So here you can see, I noticed some floating corruptors. They decide to get way too close to my stalkers, and I end up chasing them down. Blink stalkers can chase down corruptors basically indefinitely. So if you get the chance to do so, do it. And you can see that this Zerg player basically loses all of their corruptors when they had a really massive amount to start with. And 1 survives. Whenever you have an army outside of your opponent's base, where the base is on high ground, you can oftentimes blink a few stalkers into their main, or into whatever base you're sitting outside of, and you can put extreme stress onto your opponent by being in those 2 locations, by having a few stalkers in this really sensitive area, and your opponent can oftentimes attack into a very unfavorable situation, or like an unfavorable spot. So here you can see a pretty big Zerg army with more stuff on the way. If I were just to kind of move out into the open and attack, I would definitely lose the battle and end up probably losing the game. However, since I'm an observer with my army, and I'm fairly certain of where my opponent's army is, I blink just a few stalkers up into the main, and now the Zerg opponent is in a much more stressful situation than had my army just been here. They probably didn't even know my army was here when I was just sitting here. However, by just posturing slightly differently, putting a few stalkers up the ramp. The extreme stress of the opponent actually gets the Zerg player to attack into this very choky area, where I can utilize my force fields in this choke, instead of being out in the open, where I'd need basically infinite force fields to create a shell around myself. And then you of course use a few more to trap some units. Blinking, taking us some very vital queens. And now I'm going to proceed to basically just win the game. As I have all these roaches that overreacted, come up into the main. I have sentries which can keep them in there, and he's going to end up losing his base and the game, simply because I had some clever pressure. During large battles, it's also very good to use Blink in order to reposition your stalkers when they're in a bad position. In this sort of battle, having the stalkers in front is the worst thing you can do. What you want to have in front are all these zealots so that they can tank, especially the marauder damage. Having stalkers in the front will help maximize DPS for your opponent's army. Where you'd want them instead is to be out of the way of the bio, but able to still shoot the Vikings. So you'll be able to see in this battle here, the Protoss opts to blink to the side, so that this bio, in order to properly engage, will likely have to go around these force fields and hit some of the zealots. But more importantly, these stalkers are underneath the Vikings and can now properly target down Vikings. And now you can see zealots, because of the blink, are all in front of stalkers, whereas before zealots would have had to walk all the way around the side of the battle and engage probably SCVs, which wouldn't be very helpful. All the while stalkers would have been taking fire. If you have just a small pack of stalkers, it's pretty easy to blink up and down a ramp.
Intriguing.
You just walk up to it and blink up,
Very
or
wise.
blink back down.
Very well.
However, what if you have a much larger pack of stalkers? It can be pretty difficult to get all of your stalkers up or down the ramp,
Very wise.
unless you know how to queue up the blink.
For the reckoning. Very well.
In order to queue commands in StarCraft 2, you hold the shift key, and then give your
It shall
commands,
be as you
just like so,
say.
and queuing a bunch of walks.
We
You could do the same
move
thing with blink.
unseen.
You can queue a walk, and then a blink down, and then another walk.
For now.
I'll show you that.
Intriguing.
Hold shift, walk,
Very wise.
B, left click, walk.
It shall be as you say. State thy bidding.
And I accidentally have one behind for some reason.
We are one with
I'll
the
show you that
shadows.
one more time. Hold shift,
Intriguing.
right click, B, left click,
I serve.
right click.
For now.
This will let you get a really big groups of stalkers
Very well.
up and down cliffs very efficiently. And that concludes the video on Blink Micro. Please ask any questions you have on the Hotkeyit forums.